What's up guys, Agent here again with another PTS video, and today we're going to be exploring the Khajiit magicka DPS or front bar weapon trait. So one of the things that happened in 4.3.3 was that the Khajiit racial passive was changed from 8% spell and weapon crit to 10% additional crit damage. So somebody asked me on Toxic Rating Environment, well, can we see whether or not Precise ends up being stronger for front bar DPS on a magicka DPS, on a magicka Khajiit specifically, compared to using your typical infused front bar instead. So I did a couple of parses, but I'm also going to show you guys the mathematics behind it, so you guys can basically see the actual theory behind why Precise actually isn't going to win out over infused. So a little bit of spoiler alert, infused is still going to be the best option when it comes to single target DPS for magicka DPS, regardless if you're a Khajiit or not. So obviously I'm on a Khajiit, so I did do all these tests on a Nightblade, and I did two different scenarios. So I did one where I had very low crit, and I did one where I had very high crit. So the low crit was obviously Sororia and Spell Strategist. Now because I had a low crit here, I decided to go with the Thief for my Mundus Stone, just because I had low crit chance, which means that the Thief is going to be stronger than the Shadow. And that's supported by the mathematics. When I went over to the ability metrics, it did show that if I used a Thief rather than the Shadow, I would have higher damage difference. And then the high crit scenario was when I was wearing Mother Sorrow on my body, which gives me obviously very high crit, but because I had such a high crit, the Thief was actually no longer stronger, so when in those high crit scenarios I decided to go with the Shadow instead. Again, the mathematics checks out that the Shadow should give me higher damage return than the Thief by a small margin. So those were kind of my setups that I used here. Obviously I was a Khajiit, and then for the mathematical calculations that I'll do a little bit later, I am assuming that I have Major Force active. I will kind of go over that again once I do the actual math part of things. But first, let's go over and hop over to our results, our actual parse results, so you guys can actually see the numbers here. So here we are, here are the results. So on the left hand side I have the high crit scenario, so this is with the Mother Sorrow on the body, and on the right hand side I do have the low crit chance scenario, which is the Sororia and Spell Strategist on the body. I should say Sororia on the body. So you can see here that Infused is still winning over Precise. Interestingly enough, on the high crit chance scenario, Precise did end up going a little bit closer with a 1.8% difference in our average DPS, and with the low crit scenario, obviously we have higher numbers because we were running Sororia and Spell Strategist at the same time, as well as the Shadow. And Precise did end up doing worse here, 3.3% difference in DPS. There was a little bit more variation here compared to here. As you can see, 305 was our standard deviation, 433 compared to 506 and 550. So that's just something that we do want to keep in mind here. So overall, we can see that Precise is not doing as well as Infused in terms of single target DPS. Now Precise is going to be a little bit better for cleave, just because the additional crit chance does affect all of your hits with your ground dots, so blockade, path, if you're Warden, Winter's Revenge, if you're Templar, Blazing Shards and things like that, but you are giving up some single target DPS in order to do that. So me personally, I'd probably still stick with Infused just because single target DPS is, at least in my opinion, a little bit more useful overall in the trial. Then again, if you are on PC, you do have add-ons like Alpha Gear that will very quickly change out your gear sets between trash and boss pulls, so you might want to consider having a trash pull setup where you might have a Precise front bar staff or something. I personally would not do that, but some guilds will probably have optimized trash versus boss setups here. So just looking at the parse numbers, we can tell that Precise is worse than Infused for single target DPS, but why don't we go over the actual mathematics behind it as well. And as always, I do have a kind of TLDW version, simplified version down in the description below for those of you guys who don't want to know the mathematics behind it, or are interested but don't necessarily want to listen to me ramble on about math. So the way that you can determine your damage difference if you're looking at things like crit and crit damage is you compare the crit modifiers when you have the buff versus where you don't have the buff. So in the ability metric comparison calculator that I have, I calculate this automatically. So you can see here that you input your average crit chance and your average crit damage without the Thief, and that gives you some sort of crit modifier. Now it'll automatically calculate with the Thief So here it'll automatically bump up our crit chance, depending, assuming that we have the Thief Munda Stone. Our crit damage obviously stays the same, and that gives us a new crit modifier. So in order to get the damage difference that we would expect to see with the Thief, we would basically take the ratio of these two crit modifiers, multiply it by 100, and then subtract 100, and we get our percent difference. So in this particular scenario, so this is the low crit scenario where we have Sororia on the front, Sororia on the body and Spell Stratus on the front bar. If we run the Thief, we should expect to see about a 7.6% increase in our overall damage done. This obviously is not going to necessarily translate into 7.6% overall DPS because, again, this is a calculating ability metric. However, this is a good sort of roundabout ballpark figure, and we can do the exact same thing with the Shadow, regardless of whether it's with the Wrathstone value or with the current live value. So taking this concept, we can very easily then just take another crit modifier where we say we're running the Thief, we just add on the additional Precise, 7% additional crit chance from Precise. We have two new crit modifiers. Again, we find the ratio between them, multiply by 100 and subtract by 100, and that'll give us the anticipated damage difference that we would expect if we were using Precise instead of Infused. Now obviously this does not tell us the whole story here, because if we go ahead and swap back to ESO here real quick, Infused does boost our overall enchant damage. So you can see here that our enchant damage right now is 4743, and if we decide to say, let's say we want to be precise, it does drop down to 3648. I do have different CPs set up for right now, so these values are slightly different from what I had when I was doing my testing, just because I was doing several different sort of tests at this point. So these values are going to be a little bit different when we go over the actual mathematics behind it, but these will be close enough. The idea here is that because Infused does give us a stronger enchant bonus and it procs twice as often, we do need to take that into consideration when we do eventually compare these two numbers. So knowing basically our damage difference that we can expect using Precise, and if we know how much DPS Infused is adding to our overall DPS, we can actually calculate out the break-even point where Precise will do better than Infused. So if we go ahead and transition back over here, I'm going to pull up our... So here we have, this is, I believe, this is the high crit, no, this is the low crit scenario where we are running Mother Sorrow on the body, and our expected damage that we would see is about 4 point, hold on, you can't see that because I am blocking that, so let me just actually move back up here. Alright, so over here this is our expected damage difference that we would expect if we were running Precise on our low crit scenario. So this is the low crit scenario. So this is Sororia on our body, Spell Stratus on our front bar here. Now again, these numbers are a little bit different from what you saw earlier, just because probably a couple of CP differences here and there. But basically what you want to do is you want to take how much damage, additional damage Infused adds, you want to multiply that by 2 because you're doing it, proccing it twice as often, and then you want to multiply that by your crit modifier because enchants can crit and they do inherit your crit chance and your crit damage. So when we do this, this is the expected amount of additional DPS you would get from Infused. Once we know this value, and we know our approximate damage increase from Precise, what we do is we divide our increase in DPS by our damage difference. So we have about 4,000, rounded up to 4,000. We divide it by 4.88% or 0.0488, and that'll give us our break-even point. So at this value here, so 81,967 DPS, if we are above this value, then Precise is going to be stronger. If we are below this value, then Infuse is going to be stronger. As you can imagine, it's very, very difficult to hit 81 or almost 82k single target DPS on a magicka DPS. Is it possible? Maybe. Probably. If you're one of the best magicka DPS in the game, I expect you to be able to match this number, at which point Precise is going to be stronger for you in terms of single target DPS. But for most of us plebeians, Infused is definitely going to be stronger just because this value is just so very high. And this next one down here is the high crit chance scenario. So we have Mother Sorrow on the body here. This will give us a little bit of a different expected damage increase from Precise, so 4.68% versus the above 4.88%. And then again, the break-even point pretty similar, but a little bit higher here just because the damage difference is a little bit lower, so our denominator is a little bit lower, so that increases the overall value. So 85,470 DPS instead. So just based on the mathematics involved, again, assuming that you have this approximate damage difference using Infused, it's pretty much always going to be infused for single target DPS unless you are some sort of godly DPS that's able to pull these incredibly high numbers, 82k or 85k single target DPS. So again, the TLDW is going to be in the, simplified I should say, TLDW is going to be down in the description below for those of you guys who are kind of struggling to keep up with the mathematics here. But overall, the point is that Infused is still going to be the best option for single target DPS for magicka DPS. Precise might be useful for additional cleave damage, so in trash pulls, but you still probably want to stick with Infused for the time being for single target DPS. So that is it for this video. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Note that I did not test Nirnhoned because there were no changes in the in the Wrathstone PTS that warrant testing Nirnhoned. Nirnhoned is still Nirnhoned is still weaker than Infused on live, so there's no reason to test Nirnhoned because we would pretty much see the exact same results as we see on live right now. So that's why I didn't test Nirnhoned, for those of you guys who are wondering. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.